essential question for today is, what strategies do growing readers use when they answer a question after reading a text? Our target for today is I'm learning what text evidence is. I'm thinking that's an important word, text evidence, so that I can refer to details in the text when answering questions. I'll know I've got it if I can prove my answer with details and examples from the text. So today is all about going back to the text. Let's warm up our brain about text evidence with a short introduction video. As we think about our standard or our data for this standard, RL41, I can refer to details and examples in a text when explaining what the text says explicitly, and when drawing inferences from the text. I want you to reflect as we begin today and think about, where did you start on the pretest? Were you in red, yellow, or green? Where will you finish, and what will you do today to grow or to make sure that you are always increasing in your knowledge? Today we will be looking both at inferences as well as explicit. Let's dive into inferences first. Your notes say that authors don't always tell their reader everything. They rely on the reader to use inferential thinking to understand everything going on in the story. And we can think of this like we think about a formula. Text clues plus our background knowledge equals an inference. This is a lot like that stoplight that we looked at in yesterday's lesson. So here's an example of a text clue. My heart started to race as I stared down at the broken pieces. How will I be able to explain this when Mom gets home? I thought to myself. Well, my background knowledge would be, I think the character is a kid because they mention their mom. I also think the kid is nervous because that is what happens when your heart races. I love that this model includes what the reader thinks about the character and their own experience. And putting those two things together can lead us to an inference. The kid accidentally broke something important to his mom, and he is nervous about telling her when she gets home. The author did not tell us he is nervous. That is an inference the reader has to make based on the clues in the text. So one thing I want you to understand is that an inference is not a guess. It is based on evidence from the text. Very important when we're making inferences. There are some thinking stems that can help us when we're activating our background knowledge or using our schema. So notice it says making connections using our prior knowledge. That's what we already know, thinking stems. So these are some sentence starters that can help us. Starters like, that reminds me of, or I'm remembering, I have a connection to, I have schema for, or I can relate. These are all starters that will help you activate your background knowledge or your schema. And we must understand more about evidence as we're thinking about another part of that formula for inferencing. I can use text evidence, or I can use evidence from a text. Now there are different ways that you can use evidence. There's paraphrasing and there's directly quoting. Let's look at the difference between those two. Paraphrasing is when the information is in your own words, whereas an exact or direct quote uses the exact words that appear in the text. A paraphrase is when you rewrite the main ideas and key details, whereas a direct quote, you use details or facts to support your main points. Paraphrases use synonyms in your own writing style, whereas direct quotes copy the sentence exactly as it's written. Paraphrasing uses quotation marks. Quotation marks are not needed when you're paraphrasing, but when you're quoting directly from a text, you must use quotation marks around the words that you copy down word for word from the text. And lastly, paraphrasing gives credit to the original author of the text, whereas direct quotes, you give credit by citing or putting those quotation marks around the original author or text. These are two ways that growing readers can use text evidence. If we have to choose one way, directly quoting the text is the strongest type of evidence. Today we are diving deeper into our mentor text because of Winn-Dixie as we make inferences, and then we'll also be answering some explicit right there questions by going back to the text, thinking about that evidence. I'm going to begin modeling with inferencing. It's the harder type of questioning that readers often have to answer. As I'm modeling, I'm going to be using this graphic organizer that says text clues, which we know that's information or clues from the text, plus our schema, what we already know, or our prior knowledge, to lead us to our inference. So I am going to be going back to our text because of Winn-Dixie. So the text says first, I was picking out my books and kind of humming to myself when suddenly there was a loud and scary scream. And I'm going to zoom in on that excerpt or part of the text so that you can see where that came from. So you'll notice I've highlighted that in red. And now I'm going to activate my schema, what I already know. Well, I already know from my own experience that people hum when they are happy. I also already know that the main character enjoys going to the library. She spends a lot of time there. So that can lead me to an inference. I can infer that Opal is in a good mood. She's at one of her favorite places and she's humming. So notice how that clue from the text supports my inference. Let's think about the next one. Winn-Dixie raised his head off his paws and looked back and forth between me and Miss Franny. Notice, highlighted in red, where I got that information from. Straight from the text. That's my clue. And now, I'm thinking about what I already know, or my schema. Well, dogs are curious and they have good hearing. That's something I know. I've seen a dog look back and forth, and maybe you have too. So I'm thinking about what inference I can make. Since Winn-Dixie raised his head off his paws and looked back and forth between me and Miss Franny, I can infer that Winn-Dixie thinks Miss Franny and Opal should be friends because he's looking at them back and forth. Now, the author didn't tell me that, but when I go back to the text, I'm noticing right in front of it, right before it, it says, she sighed again. She looked sad and old and wrinkled. It was the same way I felt sometimes being friendless in a new town and not having a mama to comfort me. I sighed too. So I'm noticing that Winn-Dixie, he knows a lot more than just what's happening right now. Notice how, as the reader, I had to go back and look at other parts around what's happening, not just what's written on that graphic organizer, to lead me to the best inference. So I have to go back to the text. Now that I've modeled some inferences, let's go ahead and practice some explicit questions. Questions that have the answers right there in the text. Let's start with our first one. How does Opal convince her dad to let her get a dog? Well, growing readers go back to the text, and I'm noticing right underneath this photograph it says she convinces her father, who often preaches about caring for the needy, that this dog is certainly in need. Oh my goodness. So I'm thinking Opal convinces her dad to get a dog by convincing him that Winn-Dixie is needy, and since he always preaches about caring for the needy, then he should practice what he preaches. And that text evidence is already highlighted there for you. Let's look at a couple of more examples. Our next question says, how did Opal react when she heard the loud scream in the library? Okay, well in blue, I've highlighted some evidence to help me. This is what happened. I was picking out my books and kind of humming to myself, and all of a sudden, there was this loud and scary scream. I went running up to the front of the library, and there was Miss Franny Block sitting on the floor behind her desk. Okay, so I can answer this question. The answer's right there. When Opal heard it, she reacted by running to the front of the library and finding Miss Franny. And then my evidence is highlighted in blue. Now, I'm not taking the time to write all of these down, but I want you to know in your small group today, you'll be writing these answers. I'm just modeling out loud and showing you where the answers can be found in the text. The next question says, how is Opal like her mama? Well, highlighted in green it says, and this is Opal talking, I'm like my mama in that I like to be told stories. So I can put that in my own words by saying she's like her mama because she and her mama both like to listen to stories. And then to quote evidence, I would simply write this word for word straight from the text for my graphic organizer. And let's look at one more example. This question says, how does Miss Franny describe herself as a young girl? Well, highlighted in yellow, she describes herself, it says, I have to tell you I was a little Miss Know-It-All. I was a Miss Smarty Pants with my library full of books, so yes ma'am, I thought I knew the answers to everything. So she describes herself as being a Miss Know-It-All or someone who knows everything. And remember, text evidence is straight from the text. So when filling out my graphic organizer, I would need to copy this word for word from the text to prove my idea. Here you can see my brain work for the things that we spoke about and went and found the answers to on those explicit answers with that evidence quoted word for word from the text. Let's go ahead and check our understanding. And today we're looking specifically for evidence to support that text-based evidence. You'll be solving this check for understanding in your interactive notebook, and you'll be answering for me in Socrative. So let's look at yesterday's question for part A. Yesterday you answered this question: what can the reader infer is the main reason Miss Franny winked at Opal? Using the best answer for part A, you will then support it with the best answer to part B. Which sentence from the text best supports the answer to part A? So I'm actually going to move these, and I'm going to give you some think time to go back to the text and choose the strongest part B answer. Now, remember that we are looking at both because part A and part B go together like peanut butter and jelly. They are connected. Part B is that evidence piece to back up the answer to part A. And you are focusing on answering this question, part B, with the best answer.